Hi, everyone, all around the world and here in Australia. I'm doing a very, very important interview today. Mr. Stuart Hersh from New York. New York. How are you today, Stuart?
I'm great. How are you?
You look fantastic there. What's happening? You're locked up.
Look at you. You're all fancied up.
Yeah, I got to tell you, you rang. Anything you'd like me to get you, Teet? You know, I'm at your service. Butler service right here. Now, listen, people don't know who you are here. Well, not where I live anyway, around the neighborhood. So I got to tell them, right, that you're a entertainment promoter and that you do big events like Chiller Theatre in New Jersey, and that's 2 times a year, and you get all the stars together and help to provide the stars for the biggest event in the US. That's right, isn't it?
Well, it's not Chiller Theatre Expo is not my event, but I bring in celebrities to that event.
Okay,
and I've been doing that for over. They're now in their 30th anniversary year, and I've been bringing guests in for over 16 years now, twice a year.
And I was going to say, right, a lot of people mine for gold, but you actually mine for the stars because at a young age, you're able to, you're watching TV and instead of being like normal like us, right, we just watch TV and don't care, you actually live the dream and go inside the TV and find these stars of the 50s and 60s and catch up with them and meet them. Like, I don't want to get into too much detail, but as a young person, Bozo the Clown, your mum fixed it up, so Bozo rang you.
Yeah.
And Bozo the Clown was very big here in Australia. And you know what the hardest thing about Bozo the Clown I remember is? He used to have a segment of his game. He used to have a segment in the show where he had these metal buckets and he'd get the little kid to throw a ping pong ball and try and get him to go in the buckets. Do you remember that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, but that's really hard to do because when you bounce it off the first one, it goes 500 miles the other way.
Now, the thing I remember from Bozo is he brought in the big treasure chest of toys and you were trying for that. And the hardest one for me is he would line up 2 spoons and one was on the back of the other one and there was a glass and you had to hit the spoon and make it fly and land in the glass.
That's unbelievable. Anyway, now we move on. You received a call from you dirty rat, James Cagney.
James Cagney.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I got on my, I was doing stuff with celebrities and, my mom was taking me around the city and going to see TV shows and stuff like that. So when I got into school, I was going into junior high school and I got on the school paper. And the teacher was assigning all these different people, you cover this football game, you cover this teacher. And he says to me, what would you like to do? And I said, I'd like to interview celebrities. And he kind of did a double take. And I said, he says, okay, all right, fine. He said, I'll give you your own column. So I got on the phone and I started making calls. Well, before I knew it, and this is 1973, I was 13 years old. I reached my first interview was Emmett Kelly Sr., the clown, the sad-faced clown. Then the Three Stooges. I got each one of them separately, Mo, Larry, and Curly Joe Dorita. And then, James Cagney. And the way the Cagney interview came about was I tried calling the old actors home in California for Cagney. And the person who answered the phone says, oh, well, Mr. Cagney is not here. But why don't you try this phone number? This is his friend, A.C. Lyles. I didn't know anything about A.C. Lyles. So I call up A.C. Lyles. Sure enough, A.C. Lyles is his best friend. I have a big talk with him. I'm this little kid with a squeaky voice. We get to the end of the call. He says, Jimmy rarely does interviews and he rarely calls anybody back, but I'm going to tell him you sound like a nice kid. And I'm going to have him call you. So I waited and I waited and I waited. And then sure enough, the call comes in, but the call came in when I wasn't home. So I'm not home and the phone rings and this is the story. My grandfather, who was living with us, who was in his 70s at the time, from Romania, answers the phone. Hello. Yeah, this is James Cagney. I'd like to speak to Stuart Hersh. And my grandfather says, what do you want with him? like it's some gangster calling,
Of course.
for his grandson.
Did you know who Cagney was?
What's that? No, he didn't
know
get
who
it.
Cagney was? No.
Heard this grown man asking for his grandkid. So Cagney hangs up. I call back his friend AC Lyles. He gives me that story. I said, I'll be home in 10 minutes. Please tell him to call back. I'm waiting by the phone. The phone rings. This time it's, hello, a collect call from James Cagney. I take the call, and the first thing he says is, hello, Stuart. The first one was on me, and this one is on you. And we did the interview, and he was as sweet and as kind as can be. And it was years later that I realized AC Lyles was not only the person that got Cagney out of retirement to accept the American Film Institute Award, okay, after like 13 years, but AC Lyles was the president of Paramount Pictures. No clue. I had no clue. But what a, you know, I mean, for a kid at that time, I got out of Cagney, I got him to tell me that he never said, "You dirty rat." Like, I was getting an exclusive from my junior high school newspaper that like Johnny Carson couldn't even get.
Yeah, but that's unbelievable. Now, here's the other story to me that's unbelievable. Here you are, 15 years old, and you go and talk to John Lennon. Tell me that full story now for all the Beatles fans out there.
Oh, well, this was something I never dreamed would happen. I was a big Beatles fan, of course, like a lot of people are, and most people should be. So my mom is downtown in New York City at the big Manhattan Court building, okay? My father is waiting outside in the car for her. She's going inside to dissolve her business, okay? She's in there. My dad sees a cab pull up, and who comes out? John and Yoko, okay? This is January of 1976, okay? He calls John Lennon over to the car window. Hey, John! Lennon comes to the car window. He says, yes. He goes, my son's not going to believe this. Could I please have your autograph for him? He says, sure. And he's scurrying around. Lennon says, take your time. Get what you need. He gets a piece of paper. He says, what's his name? I mean, this is how cool this guy was. He says, Stuart. He writes to Stuart, love, John Lennon. Now, my dad calls me up. I'm home. I'm about 20 minutes, north of New York City. He calls me up. He says, you're not going to believe what happened. He tells me this whole story that just played out. I said, where are you? He tells me exactly where he is. I said, John Lennon is in that court building. He says, yes. I said, okay, I'm on my way. And I'm 15 years old. I didn't drive. So I grab a bus to a subway to go down there. And with me, I bring an original John Lennon model, a Revell model that they made of the Beatles. They made models you assemble, and it's of them. Okay. I bring one because I had read in a magazine that Elton John had given John Lennon these little rubber Beatles dolls that came out in the 60s. And he freaked over them, and he loved them, and he collects Beatles stuff. I'm like, who knew? So I had this model, this unbuilt model in the box. I go down there. I find the court. It's an empty courtroom, okay? He's there. Yoko's there. They're sitting on the side with everybody watching the proceedings that are going on at the moment while people are on the stand. This was not the immigration case. This was the case he had against Morris Levy of Adam 8 Records. And you look up Morris Levy, there's a million stories about Morris Levy. In fact, read Tommy James' book, you'll know exactly who Morris Levy is. So I get in there, and it wasn't the immigration case. This is a case over an album that came out called The Roots of Rock and Roll. The story was John Lennon went to Florida, to Disney World with Morris Levy and his kid. He brought Julian. They had a great time. Lennon says to Morris Levy, here's a cassette of the album I'm working on, and gives him a released version of the rock and roll album. Okay. Morris Levy, who owned this TV label called, this Act Now, Buy It Today, called Adam 8 Records, releases the tape. and calls it the greatest hits of John Lennon. As soon as you saw that on TV, you knew something was fishy here. They had this blurry photo of John Lennon in color that would pop up in the commercial like 5 times, never changed to another photo. Okay. And it's like, John Lennon sings all the greatest hits of rock and roll. Anyhow, he's in this court case. He's bored out of his mind because he, the immigration case is one thing. This is just something he had to be there for. I get the courage up. I'm sitting across the room, and I get the courage up to finally go up to John Lennon. And I go up and I make my way up there. I'm 15 years old now, and I'm a Beatles freak, and I'm looking at him. First, he caught me off guard because he had just cut his hair short, and he had clear glass in the glasses. I'm expecting John Lennon, hair down to here with the red tinted glasses, rock and roll John Lennon. But he was trying to get a green card, so he was looking as straight-laced as possible. So I make my way to behind where they're sitting at the benches. And I go over to him, and now I'm like this, and I tap him on the shoulder, and he turns around. And, and I'm like, is there, do you think maybe there's a way that we could possibly do an interview kind of for my school paper, if you could? And he's like, no. And he turns around, starts talking to Yoko again. And I'm like, oh. And then, I resign myself to the fact I'm not going to get this interview. And I reach in my bag and I tap him on the shoulder again. And I go, well, I brought this model for you. I know you collect these things. This was like giving a kid a present on Christmas now. He lit up like a kid, like he shows Yoko on the box. I saw him underline with his finger where it said the kookiest of them all. Okay. A couple of girls walked into the courtroom, younger girls, and they're looking at John Lennon and waving at him. He takes the model and he's got it next to his face like this. He was in heaven with this. So he was so happy that he turns back to me now and he goes, I had enough of this, but I'm starting to type a little. So if you leave questions with spaces and send them to me, I'll fill it in for you. And I'm like, okay. And then I was testing him. I said, you want me to send it to your office or to your home? Because I knew he lived in the Dakota. And he said, oh, send it to me home because I'll get it. I said, okay, all right, great. Well, you want the full story on this? Because
I want
okay.
The full story.
So I said, okay. And I had said when I first, here's the best part. Before I asked him about the interview. I asked him and then he said no. And then I said, and I was telling him a truth here. I said, I was down to the Dakota, like a few months back, and I brought you some T-shirts that I made up because my parents are in the T-shirt business. And I sent those up, and I also then tried to reach you through Western Union telegrams, and I spent a lot of money trying to. Now, obviously, I'm trying to get my way with him here. And he just, he looks at me and he deadpan, John Lennon. Well, that was dumb, wasn't it? Yeah. And then he turned around and he said, I had enough of this and I'll do it. And I learned how to type. And he was just John Lennon. Everything you read about John Lennon, this was him. And he looked at Yoko and he says, what were the T-shirts like? And I described them and he looked at Yoko and Yoko said, no. And I said, well, listen, you're here tomorrow. I said, I'm going to bring you 3 more T-shirts. He says, okay, fine. We get into the elevator. We go down, having a break, or I get into the elevator. The next day I come, my dad comes with me, and my dad brings a Polaroid camera that at the time was the big thing. It was called the Big Shot. It was made to take a Polaroid picture, but only of a face. Okay, like a one shot. It had this big nose on it. Okay, it wasn't collapsible. My dad's standing outside with this camera. They won't let him in a court building. They said, oh, you can't go in with that. This is okay. My dad's now waiting in the cold out. It's January. Okay, I go upstairs to John Lennon. I give him the T-shirts. Now they're just breaking for recess. And he's going through the bag. And he takes it out. And I had made one that said love for Yoko. And in the O, I put a picture of John. Okay, I gave him a T-shirt that had a Beatles lunchbox on the front of it for him, and it said Dr. Winston O'Boogie, which was his nickname. Yep. And I gave him a little tiny shirt for Sean that said I'm the boss. Okay, and he looked at me and he was laughing and he says, "You're not kidding? He's a boss already." Okay, and Sean was just a little baby then. And his lawyer comes over. They break for a recess, and the lawyer comes over, and he's like, "Okay, John, this is good, and this is going." And Lennon cuts him off, and he goes, "We got T-shirts," you know. Now,
fantastic.
Now we're going for the recess, and I'm getting into this little court, elevator to go down one floor, and I'm next to John Lennon. Like I'm freaking out. I'm like, I'm trying to be cool, but there's John Lennon right here. And the elevator gets to the first floor. Now we're headed for the doors to go out, the revolving doors. And I've got just a couple of seconds now to tell him my dad's outside with a camera. So I'm like, John, my dad is outside with a camera. And now I gave him the T-shirts. I gave him the model, and I go, he just wants to take a quick picture. And he goes, well, they don't give us a lot of time for lunch, and then he just stops himself from saying that. And he says to Yoko, he goes, his father's outside with a camera. And as we get to the revolving door to go out and I'm ahead of him, he goes, come on, you little hustler. and he stopped when he got outside and they took the picture with me. The picture came out terrible because my dad was outside for so long, the Polaroid film got, like cold. So it came out with this brown haze on it. To top that off, I was so excited to have this picture that I got in the back of my parents' car. I put the picture in my front pocket and creased it on, and it's like on my face is the crease, which is okay. But I have that picture. It's posted on my Facebook, and I'm very, very proud of it. Nobody has been able to fix it for me yet, but that's my John Lennon story. And a week later, I sent him here. Wait, here's the punchline.
Yeah, I know.
I typed out the questions like he wanted, 2 questions on each page. I put a blank page on top so the questions wouldn't smear. Okay, sent it off to the Dakota. Comes back a week later, and it's not typed in. It's handwritten in. And not only is it handwritten in, he took the blank page from the top and he drew me a picture. And it's a lamb standing on a cloud and he's thinking, and it has the little think bubbles and it says, hello, Stuart. It says, hi, Stuart. And then it says John Lennon at the bottom. And that was my John Lennon experience. And it could not have been better. And he could not have been more John Lennon than you would have wanted him to be. He was that guy.
That's an unbelievable story, Stuart. And I don't know if you've heard these other stories, but what happens is he was doing a press conference, right? And the Rickenbacker company came with a guitar and gave it to George. And John's sitting there going, where's mine? Where's mine? In the press conference. Have you heard that?
No.
Yeah, that's fact. And then there's another one. He used to go down to the office of the Beatles and go, where's the free stuff? Any free stuff for me? No, it's true. You go through the Beatle books.
What I do know about him is I did one-word associations with him on this interview. And I said, I said Bowie. He said thin. I said Elvis. He said fat. I said Howard Cosell, who had interviewed him, at a football game. He said ham. Okay. I said Ringo. He said friend. I said Yoko. He said love. I said Paul. He said extraordinary. I said John. He said great. Okay. Years and years later, Paul McCartney is in New York City doing a signing at the Virgin Megastore in Times Square. I wait all night and I've got a copy of this interview in my hand to give to Paul. I get up to the table. I'm a few feet from the table and Paul's security guy, blanking out on his name now, but his famous security guy has been with him for years. I think he's a Scottish guy. Gosh, what's his name? I know there's a lot of people out there that know this name. Anyhow, he comes up to me and he goes, I'll take that. And I said, no. I said, this is for Paul. This is an interview that I did with John. It's a copy. I want to give it to him. He says, I'll make sure he gets it. Okay. So now, and this is only, a few years back. And so now I approach Paul right after that. And I immediately say to Paul, I did an interview, a questionnaire with John Lennon, and I gave it to your bodyguard over here, and he'll give it to you. I wanted to give it to you. I said, but what I wanted you to know is that when I did one-word associations on here, for your name, he said extraordinary. And Paul got silent and he looked at me and he said what? And I said, he said extraordinary. And I saw him just drift off for a minute and he said, what year was this? And I said, this was January 76. And again, he went off into some thought, and then he broke right back into being Paul. And he was like, wow, very clever doing a questionnaire, mate. You know, gave me the wink and the smile. But of all the people on that line that were seeing Paul, that were like, oh, Paul, I love your music. Oh, you're the greatest. How many people can say that they brought a positive message from John Lennon to Paul McCartney?
That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary, Stuart. You know, all the Beatles clubs all over Facebook, they'll be watching this and going, gee, that's unbelievable, because there's the proof there that he loved Paul.
Right.
And that drawing that you got, that's unbelievable. I hope you got that frame somewhere. You haven't thrown it in the back room or something.
No, it's something that is just, you know, one of the greatest things that anybody ever gave to me. You know, I treasure.
I'm going to ask you a question. I'm a big Monkees fan.
Yes.
Did you know the Monkees, or did you have anything to do with the Monkees at all? Can you give me some monkey stories so then I can send it around to the monkey FB clubs?
I was working for a little magazine called Rock Bill, ROCKBILL. Rock Bill was, as you go to a Broadway show, and they give you Playbill, which is, you know, the little booklet that tells you what you're watching. Yep. The same place had developed something called Rock Bill. So they had it at the rock clubs, you know, the Bottom Line in New York City, the Bitter End, they would give you Rock Bill. So I said to my editor at the time, I said, the Monkees are reuniting. Can I cover this story? And he said, go ahead. And I said, all right. Next thing I know, I'm at the 1986 press conference at the Hard Rock Cafe. And that's the biggest. This is after MTV built them up to, you know, and there they are, and it's surreal. You know, there's the Monkees. You know, it's absolutely amazing. And I sit through all this. Now I already had it scheduled that as soon as that press conference ended, Davy Jones was going to meet me across the street at David Fishoff's offices, the promoter of that original tour, and do an interview with me for Rock Bill. So right after that press conference, I got to go to David Fishoff's offices across the street and spend 45 minutes with Davy Jones and do this interview with him. Davy could not have been sweeter, could not have been better, and could not have been more like one of the best interviews anybody could ever ask for, because he was like a machine, but he was a personal person too. He had a heart, you know, so he wasn't just a machine. But you would say, you know, can you tell me a little bit about the movie Head? And he'd go, the movie Head, right. And then he would go into the answer, you know, and then I would go, oh, you know, can you tell me about, you know, I know you did something with Jan Berry of Jan and Dean. Jan Berry, right. And he would go into this whole thing about it, you know, and he was wonderful. He was wonderful. And I met him about a year later. After that, he had put his book out called They Made a Monkey Out of Me. And I was working at a radio station in Westchester County, a little radio station in the top of a building where there was a bank at the bottom, and up in the top were the offices for this little radio station. So I got Davey to come there to do a live interview. I'm excited as all heck. And I say to the general manager, listen, this is big stuff, because I had been to the concerts and stuff at that point. I said, you got to put some barrier or something for the people, the fans downstairs. So the GM says, oh, no, I'm going to have them all come up here. Really? Okay. So I'm in the place. All of these people are coming in. All of these people. It's a little place. All these people are filling up now the office of the radio station. The elevator door opens up. There's Davey. Davey is white. Davey's like, you know, and they walked him through and they brought him into the little room where the studio was, and he went on the air and did the interview. again, a heart of gold. I talked to him and you know, a few times after that. Let me give you one quick story that I just witnessed. It was a Davy Jones concert, and it was at Mohegan Sun and in Connecticut. And he's out at the merchandise table after the show, and he's autographing stuff, and everybody's buying all that stuff. And some guy, you know, comes from outside in the casino area, and he's kind of hanging over the railing. He wasn't even at the show. Hey, Davey, and he's kind of drunk, you know. Davey, can I get an autograph? Can I get something? And Davey's like, sure. What would you like? And he goes, a T-shirt. And I saw Davey like wince for a minute, and he goes, okay, mate. And he grabs the shirt and he signs it, and he throws it off to him. Doesn't ask for anything for it. This was Davy Jones. Exactly. You know, people ask me about the Monkees, and to me, for me, I know people have different interactions, but he was the heart of the Monkees for me. You know, he was a very, very kind person. If I may give you one more little thing, when I was having my second marriage, the girl that I was marrying, I met her standing online for a Davy Jones concert at Mohegan Sun, the same show. And so now we're setting up the wedding plans a couple of years later, and Davy is at Chiller. Somebody brought him in. And I go up to Davy and I go, Davy, is there any way you would come to our wedding? We met at your, you know, and I was prepared to pay him, but, you know, he didn't say no right away. This was the kind of guy he was. He said, where? And I told him where it was. And I guess he thought it would be too far or whatever. And he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. He says, I wrote this song called I'll Love You Forever. And you give me your address. I'll send you the sheet music to it, and you can play it at your wedding. And I said, wow. I said, okay, cool. And I gave him my address. And you know, like within 2 weeks, I got an envelope, a manila envelope with his handwriting on the outside, my address. I opened it up, and it wasn't a sheet music you would buy in a store. It was on this, like you would have in a band, you know, this manila kind of paper, you know, this cardboard, you know, and there it was, the sheet music to I'll Love You Forever. And he signed it, and he included a disc of love songs that he did. Unbelievable. And, that was the kind of guy he was. Going to see his concerts was my happy place. It was something.
I got a story about Davey, okay?
Go ahead.
Davey came to Australia to a Monkees conference, right? And I went with my wife, and I took my poster, the one that I had from 1967, and I had it as a 9-year-old. And Davey was the first one to sign it. Anyway, we went there. And I know these guys, the Monkees, because I watched them all my life, and they're my number one group of all time because I was too young for the Beatles. In 64, I was just 6. Anyway, we go to the Malvern Town Hall, and I'm waiting with a crowd, and I see this car coming, and I stick my head in it. It's Davey being driven by a lady, and I get my first album, right? And I go, come on, Davey, sign it. You know, I'm your fan. He gets it. He writes a texter. Then we go inside, and then he's signing things at the end. And I got a photo, and I got to meet him with my wife.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say to Davey, right, because I know they've got such a sense of humor, and I'm such a fan that I wanted to go up to Davey and say my opening line was going to be, you look bigger on TV. I wanted to say it, but I couldn't do it. Because he might be offended. But that is a true story. I was just dying to do that gag on him to see what he's going to say.
That happens, and I can totally relate to that. I was 14 years old, and I went to California a year after I interviewed the Three Stooges on the phone. And I went, and I just drove, didn't call in advance or anything. I drove to Mo Howard's house. And all the time I'm walking up to the door and I'm saying, oh man, I got to get a picture of him, like, you know, like with his fingers in my eyes, you know, and who opens the door? But this frail little old man, this skinny little short, they were so short, and you know, and with the silver hair, and I was like, hi sir, you know, and he was a very private man, but he invited me in, and I showed him the school newspaper that we did, and once he saw that, he knew that I was, you know, for real, and he invited me in and took me to the garden in his back, and we took pictures, and he was just sweet.
You met Larry Fine too, didn't you?
On that same visit, I had interviewed Larry Fine, Mo Howard, and then Curly Joe Dorita, the last Curly to join them, because he was the only one, the last third person to join the Stooges at that time that was still around. Mo and Larry were always around. You know, they were in all incarnations of the Three Stooges. It was always Mo, Larry, and whether it was Shemp or Curly Joe or Joe Besser. So yes, when I got to California after I did the interview, I went to visit all three of them, you know, at their places. Larry was in the old actor's home in Woodland Hills. He had a stroke, but God bless him, he had a heart of gold. I came in unannounced. He was just finishing dinner in the dining room. They said, "Oh, there's Mr. Fine." I went over to him. I said, "Hi, I'm Stuart Hersh. I interviewed you for my school paper." He says, "Wheel me into my room." And I wheeled him into his room, and we just spent time, and he just told me all about the Three Stooges, and he had pictures. Stories. And I remember Larry taking out this little painting that he made of seagulls flying in the sky, and he goes, "You see this?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You see the signature at the bottom?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I get $25 a piece for these." He goes, "Without that signature," he goes, "nobody would pay anything for this."
That's funny. Sam Petrello's your cousin. He's a dead ringer for Jerry Lewis. He plays in a movie called Bela Lugosi Meets the Brooklyn Gorilla.
Yes.
And this guy looks like Jerry Lewis, a dead ringer. Tell me a story about him. What's it like walking with your cousin and he looks like Jerry Lewis in the street?
Well, if anybody stopped Sammy, he you know, and said, "Oh, you know, do your Jerry Lewis or whatever," you know, he would immediately go into that, you know. But if you watch Brooklyn Gorilla, yes, you would swear this was Jerry Lewis. A lot of people to this day think they watched Jerry Lewis in that movie, and he was only 17 years old in that movie.